Hey guys, Justin here. I've been hearing a lot of buzz about this new game called NASCAR Ignition 21 lately, so I finally wanted to just go ahead and try it for myself. And being an iRacing veteran, I was going in a little skeptical. It's a console game, it's kind of made for arcade style gamers, but boy was I shocked when I found out how much better of a game NASCAR Ignition is to iRacing. And I want to detail the top 5 ways that it is right in this video. Number 5 is that NASCAR Ignition is less expensive. This is no secret to anybody, but when you start crunching the numbers, it just becomes insane how much more cheaper NASCAR Ignition is than iRacing, to the point where you just start questioning whether iRacing is worth it at all. Now, normally NASCAR Ignition is a little bit less than $20 on Steam, but I was able to purchase it for a measly $6.75 off of G2A. Now compare this by buying all of the tracks and the next gen car that you would need to drive all of this experience on iRacing, and that would be a whopping $402, and that doesn't even take into account the membership. Now you can say whatever you want about laser scan tracks, better driving experience, yada yada yada, but math is math. And NASCAR Ignition on a per track basis is 1.6% the cost of an iRacing track. If a Big Mac was 1.6% the price of Five Guys, I would never go to Five Guys ever again. Now, I hear the excuses in the comments already, but I see this as an absolute win for NASCAR Ignition. At number 4, it's racing against big names. There's something to be said about being able to drive against the official NASCAR roster in a race in a video game. Now, I know what you're saying again. You can set AI rosters in iRacing where you can have the right paint schemes and the right names, but guess what? That takes effort. You know what doesn't take effort? Launching NASCAR Ignition and jumping into a race. Having it be plug and play makes it far more accessible to the general NASCAR fan to race with the names that they so want to race with. If racing games are all supposed to be about this immersion, then the cars that you're driving around should be a big factor. And in NASCAR Ignition, you can drive around those cars that make you feel immersed, while in iRacing, sometimes you just are driving around cars that just don't cut it. I want to be driving door to door with drivers like Kyle Larson, Kyle Busch, Chase Elliott, and not some loser fake sounding names like Steve Hoffman or Kevin Kramer or Anthony Alfredo. So once again, another absolute win for NASCAR Ignition. For number 3, I know what you guys are saying. Talk about the driving already. iRacing owns NASCAR Ignition and driving. Well, I wouldn't be so sure about that because for number 3, we have better keyboard support. Now, initially in my NASCAR Ignition playthrough, I did want to play with wheel and pedals, but unfortunately, NASCAR Ignition doesn't have the technology to run Logitech wheel and Fanatec pedals together, which is okay because they're run by a small company and not the huge conglomerate that iRacing is. There's bound to be a few bugs here or there. So for my keyboard playthrough, I decided to be an absolute Chad and not use any assists except for shifting because I could not find which buttons on the keyboard were the shifting buttons. I am not sure they exist, but once again, that's okay. Small mistakes here or there, we can choose to overlook them. But what really stood out to me was just how much better keyboard felt on NASCAR Ignition than it did on iRacing. And I think this is a very good thing because you can't expect every racer in the world to have access to fancy things like a steering wheel or a controller. I think that what you have to make a game for is the most common denominator between everybody. And what does everybody have? They have a mouse and a keyboard. So once again, great job to Motorsports Games and NASCAR Ignition, and a little bit of advice to the guys over at iRacing. I would maybe reallocate some of your resources from some vanity projects like scanning new cars and new tracks and even rain, and move them over to something that would be more unifying with the community like keyboard support. And continuing on the trend of ways that NASCAR Ignition is a better driving experience than iRacing, we will go to number 2, which is Circuit of the Americas Turn 16. So I spent a few hours trying to find some tracks that were better in NASCAR Ignition than they were in iRacing, and I couldn't really find any, but that's to be expected. I mean, look at the price point that we talked about earlier. That's definitely to be expected, so I kind of narrowed my search down trying to find corners, just specific corners, and that was kind of hard too, but finally I think I landed on one, and that is the unsung hero of all road course turns in my opinion, and that is COTA Turn 16. Because You might talk about turn 15 a lot. That's a really sharp corner. And you might even talk about turn 17 and 18 a little more because that's kind of a wider corner that you can build some speed into turn 19. But no, I'm going to focus on the underdog turn 16. And it's good to see that motorsports games really put the care into this turn that it deserves, because if you look at it in iRacing, it just looks a little bland to me, and the driving experience, it's boring in iRacing. It's almost a little too real, you know what I mean? But in Ignition, NASCAR Ignition, in the keyboard even, it's a very, very overall good experience, and I would recommend that turn in NASCAR Ignition a little more. And finally, at number 1, the biggest reason why NASCAR Ignition is a better game than iRacing is iPad. Having an iPad inside of your car just is a whole nother realm of immersion that NASCAR Ignition provides over iRacing. With iRacing, you're even lucky if your steering wheel shows up when you're in the car. Having something like an iPad in the game really just shows that motorsports games went above and beyond on the details. Having an iPad is really just like a status symbol to show that you're rich over other people. Like, I remember my friend Kyle back in middle school. He went to a private school where I was at a public school, and Kyle was always showing me the iPad that his school got him to do homework and assignments on it. I was like, man, why doesn't my school have iPads? We just have Chromebooks, and it was like the Chromebooks barely even worked. I couldn't even go on coolmathgames.com on them. And I asked my mom, I'm like, well, why does Kyle's school get iPads? And my mom was like, well, Kyle's parents pay for that, so it's like they better get iPads. And I'm like, well, I guess it's good that I go to a school that doesn't cost any money. And then she said, oh boy, does it cost money. We pay it every year in our taxes. And that's when I learned the importance of levies and taxing for the local government to go to school, have public schools available. And what was I talking about again? Please leave a comment below with ways that NASCAR Ignition is better than iRacing, and if you don't, I will be deleting it.